You're lying back, maybe in your room, maybe somewhere dim, quiet, letting the world soften a little. So before we begin, take one slow breath, in and out, because the story we're about to drift into doesn't like to be rushed. It waits, it listens, and it remembers, even when the rest of the world forgets. Imagine a narrow mountain road, no lights, just the moon hanging like a dying lantern, and a man, alone, standing beside his parked truck. He's staring at a rusted gate, a military graveyard. Wind is crawling through the branches like someone dragging nails across old wood. The man hears it first as a faint tremor. Boots, marching boots, not fast, not slow, just steady, precise, measured. A rhythm that feels older than the earth under his feet. He whispers, "No, not again." But the sound grows closer, clearer, like a column of invisible soldiers passing by. His breath tightens, his hands shake. Then one boot step lands directly behind him, right behind his left heel. He turns. There's no one there, but the ground sinks, as if someone unseen has just taken another step, and another, marching straight toward him. And that's where our story truly begins. Hey, welcome back to another night of slow drifting horror. The kind that doesn't jump, doesn't scream, doesn't break the quiet. Instead, it sits beside you, tells you a story, lets the fear grow softly, slowly, like fog rolling over an abandoned field. So if you're ready, if the room is dim, if the world outside has gone quiet, let's walk gently into the dark. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe to the channel, not because it helps the algorithm, but because nights like these are better when we face the shadows together, one story at a time. All right, lean back, let's drift. Dr. Thomas Hale didn't look like the kind of man who believed in ghosts. He didn't even believe in sleep anymore, if we're being honest. PTSD had a way of carving years out of a person, quietly, steadily, like ocean waves eating away at a cliff. He used to be Navy, twice deployed. Now he was, well, something between retired and running away. His daughter, Emily, insisted he needed a slower environment, somewhere quiet, somewhere peaceful. She had no idea what was waiting in the mountains. The town was small, maybe too small. A few diners, a gas station, houses that looked like they were built by someone who hated angles. The air smelled like pine, with a strange undercurrent of old metal. Thomas drove up during late afternoon. Sunlight washed the hills in soft gold. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small breath loosen in his chest. But then he saw it. On the left side of the road, behind a slanted fence that had given up trying to stand straight, lay a military graveyard, or what was left of it. Rows of crooked white stones, names washed away by time. Grass growing unevenly, like something beneath was trying to push through. A sign, half buried in weeds, read, "Fallen Battalion Memorial Ground, established 1889. He frowned. Fallen Battalion? He'd never heard of it. And Thomas had studied military history. He knew the stories, knew all the forgotten wars, forgotten units, or at least he thought he did. But this one felt wrong. Older than the sign suggested, older than the war it claimed to belong to. Emily's voice crackled through his memory. "Dad, please, don't overthink things before we even move in." She always said that, and he always ignored her. He parked near the cabin they rented, an old ranger's lodge, long abandoned, but recently renovated by a local family who clearly believed renovation meant wipe the dust, pray for the best. Inside, everything smelled faintly like cedar and wet stone. The air was cool, quiet, too quiet. Thomas unpacked slowly, deliberately, the way soldiers learn to do everything. Calm hands, exact movement, but he couldn't stop glancing at the window. At the graveyard beyond it, shadowed by evening, still as a painting, and as dust crept over the mountains, he heard it again. Boots, far away at first, too far to make sense, then closer, steady, matched in rhythm, a military march. Only there was no road there, no drills, no people, just stones, dead grass, and the soft, cold wind. Thomas froze. His breath turned shallow. He'd heard boots before, memory boots, phantom boots, the kind that PTSD whispered into his ear in the middle of the night. But this was outside, not inside, outside. He moved to the window, slowly, carefully, like approaching a dangerous animal. Nothing, just the graveyard, yet the sound kept marching. Right in front of him, invisible, unseen, but undeniably there. And then it stopped, complete silence, until a single boot step landed just beyond the window glass. He stepped back instinctively. His heart threatened to beat out of his chest. He whispered, "Who's there?" No answer, just silence thick enough to touch. He rubbed his face, frustrated. "This is stress," he muttered. "Just stress." But stress didn't shake the window pane. And it did, a faint tremor, like someone or something had tapped the glass. When he finally crawled into bed, exhaustion pulling at his bones, he told himself the same lie every soldier tells when the dark starts whispering, "It's all in your head." But the night had other plans. Thomas slept lightly, if you could call it sleep, more like drifting, half awake, half alive. And somewhere in that in-between space, he heard them, voices, not words, just the low, murmuring hum of soldiers speaking quietly in formation, the way they used to talk before deployment, soft, steady, voices blending in the dark. He opened his eyes. The room was dark, except for a sliver of moonlight cutting up across the floor. And in that strip of light were footprints, boot prints, one after another, dusty, recent, leading from the front door, straight to his bedroom. He sat up, breath shaking. "This isn't real," he whispered. But the footprints didn't disappear. PTSD hallucinations were chaotic, messy, unpredictable. These prints, perfect, aligned, military standard spacing. He reached down and touched one. His finger came back dusty. This was real. And then behind him wood creaked, a slow, heavy floorboard, as if someone had just stepped onto it. Thomas didn't move, didn't breathe. His instincts told him not to turn around. Don't acknowledge it. Don't react. But curiosity, the kind born from fear rather than bravery, slowly forced him to turn his head. There was nothing there. Nothing. But the air behind him felt colder, thicker, occupied. He whispered, "What do you want?" Silence. Until a voice, dry, thin, like wind scraping through metal, answered, "Roll call." Thomas's blood froze. Every hair on his body stood up. His mouth went dry. "Who said that?" But the voice was gone. The cold remained. Emily arrived the next day, bright and energetic as always. She brought groceries, blankets, and that soft, worried look she always wore when she glanced at her father. "How was your first night here?" she asked. Thomas considered lying, considered saying something harmless. But all that came out was quiet. Emily smiled. "Good. You need quiet." He forced a nod, even though the graveyard outside the window felt like it was staring directly at him. Emily wandered around the cabin, humming softly, placing things where she thought they made the space feel homey. He let her. Seeing her happy always made the world a little less sharp. But when she opened the front door to bring in another box, she paused. "Dad, what's that on the porch?" Thomas walked over. Boot prints, fresh, leading up to the door. "What the hell?" Emily whispered. "Are these from your boots?" "No," Thomas said softly. "They're not." She looked at him like she wanted to ask more, but didn't. Instead, she sighed, forced a smile, and said, "Okay, mountain things. Probably dirt washed down from the trail." She knew it was a bad explanation. He knew it. The porch knew it, but neither said anything else. The second night was worse. Thomas tried to sleep, tried ignoring the graveyard, tried pretending he didn't feel eyes on him every time he walked past the window. But when the clock hit 2:17 a.m., the exact same minute war had taught him to fear, he heard it. Boots, marching, again. But this time, there was a rhythm behind the rhythm. Voices, commands, low, muffled, old, like soldiers drilling underground. He sat up, breath unsteady. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. He walked to the window slowly, whispering to himself, it's nothing, just don't look too long." But he did. He looked. And in the graveyard, through the blue glow of moonlight, 3 silhouettes stood between the headstone. Tall, still, motionless, watching his cabin, watching him. He froze. One of them slowly lifted an arm and saluted him. A cold shiver raced down his spine. His throat tightened. His heartbeat became a trembling drum in his ears. He stepped back, lost his breath. And then, from somewhere deep in the trees, dozens of voices whispered at once, "Recruit." He stumbled away from the window, almost tripping. He reached the corner of the room, pressing his back to the wall, breathing hard. The whisper came again. Closer. "Recruit." His vision blurred. "No, I'm not." but the shadows pressed against the house softly like gathering soldiers encircling a new target. The floorboard by his bed creaked again, then another, heavy, precise, marching steps, coming closer, right toward him, and the voice, the same cold metallic scrape, spoke. "Roll call," Thomas whispered. "I'm not one of you," but the voice answered, "You will be." The final thing he heard before everything went silent was the faint jingle of dog tags. Dog tags that weren't his. Dog tags belonging to soldiers who hadn't breathed for over a century. Dr. Thomas Hale woke the next morning with that strange, foggy heaviness in his chest. The kind that makes you feel like you slept underwater instead of in a bed. And for a moment, he couldn't tell if the whispers from the night were real or just stress doing its usual late-night dance in his mind. But then he noticed the thin line of dust on the floor where the footprints had been. A faint trail like someone dragged their boots through the room and left without considering that living people tend to notice things like that. And he sighed quietly because he was too tired to be terrified, but not tired enough to call it nothing. Emily was already awake, moving around the kitchen, humming the same little tune she always hummed when she was trying to pretend everything was totally normal. And Thomas walked in slowly, rubbing the back of his neck and wondering how much he should tell her, because she deserved honesty, but he wasn't sure honesty would keep her safe in a place that felt like it had opinions about who belonged here and who didn't. She poured him coffee with that soft smile of hers and said, "You look like you didn't sleep at all." And he gave a tiny laugh, the kind that isn't really a laugh, but more of a polite sound a tired man makes when he doesn't want to worry his daughter. And he said, "Just a rough night," which, if we're being honest, was like calling a hurricane a light breeze. Emily kept glancing at him though, little quick looks, like she sensed something was off. And eventually she asked, "Did you hear anything weird last night? Like footsteps?" And Thomas froze for half a second because he hadn't expected her to notice anything. Not yet, but she said it so casually, like she was checking if the cabin had mice or if a raccoon had tried to steal leftover pizza. He kept his voice steady and simple. Old cabins make sounds. And she nodded even though her face said she didn't buy it at all. They drove into town later to pick up supplies, and the locals behaved like people who've seen too much weather and not enough sunlight, giving small nods, polite smiles, the kind that don't reach the eyes. And when Emily mentioned where they were staying, a cabin near the old military cemetery, the cashier paused while scanning a can of soup, her hands stiffening just slightly before she said, "You folks should keep your lights on at night. Things wander from the hills when it gets cold." Emily laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke, but Thomas saw the cashier's expression and knew it wasn't humor, not even close. On the drive back, Emily talked about fixing up the cabin, maybe adding some cozy lamps, maybe getting one of those tiny fireplaces that look fake, but somehow still feel comforting. And Thomas let her talk, because her voice made the road feel less empty, but his eyes kept drifting toward the graveyard every time the trees parted just enough to reveal the crooked stones standing in the fading afternoon light. Something was different now. The air felt thicker. He could swear he saw movement, slow, subtle, between the headstones. And when he blinked, everything went still again, like the place was playing dead. That night, the sky was clear, the stars sharp and cold, and Thomas tried to read, tried to distract his mind, but the silence outside felt too deliberate, too perfect, like someone had pressed mute on the entire forest. Around midnight, he heard Emily's soft footsteps padding down the hallway, then her voice whispering, "Dad, I think someone is outside." Thomas stood up, heart tightening, and walked with her to the window. She pointed to the tree line, her voice shaking just a little. "I saw someone, or I thought I did. A tall figure, not moving, just standing there." He looked out and saw nothing, but the kind of nothing that feels crowded, the kind that has weight. He told her gently, "Stay here," which was probably not Father of the Year advice, but old habits die hard, and he stepped outside with the flashlight. The beam cut through the trees, slicing shadows into shapes that didn't belong to anything real, and he moved slowly, boots crunching on frost-tipped grass. No animals, no wind, no sounds at all. Just the smell of old leaves and something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. He felt the presence before he saw anything, a cold awareness, like someone was standing right behind him, watching the back of his neck. But when he turned, the yard was empty. As he lowered the flashlight, its beam slid across the ground and caught something small, hanging from a low branch of a pine tree, a pair of dog tags, old, tarnished, blackened by time. He picked them up, feeling the metal sting with cold, and wiped enough dirt off to read the faint engraving. The name wasn't one he recognized, not from any war he knew, and the serial number looked wrong, like it belonged to a format from a different century. And then the quiet broke. Boots, marching again. Not distant this time, close, surrounding him, encircling the cabin. He held the flashlight steady, breathing through his teeth, and whispered, "Not tonight." But the boots kept coming, the rhythm deep and steady. The same pattern he'd heard in the Navy, the same cadence soldiers used when they marched into places they knew they wouldn't come back from. The air around him shifted with a slow, chilling pulse, and he felt pressure, like a group of men had stopped in formation around him, waiting for an order. Then a voice rolled low across the yard, almost too soft to understand, a whisper soaked with age. "Fall in." Thomas stepped back instinctively, shaking his head, whispering, "No, I'm not part of this." But the voice answered, closer, colder. "You were chosen." He could feel them now, unseen bodies brushing the air as they shifted, moving into ranks, preparing to march, and he stumbled toward the cabin, gripping the dog tag so tightly the metal cut into his palm. Inside, Emily saw his face, pale and shaken, and asked, "Dad, what happened out there?" He didn't tell her. Not yet. Not when she looked so frightened already. He just whispered, "Lock the doors." And she did. But long after she fell asleep, Thomas sat awake in the dark living room, listening to the boots fade into the forest, their rhythm echoing softly, like they were marching deeper into the hills, or circling back, waiting for him to sleep again. And just before dawn, when the world was coldest and quietest, he heard the whisper through the window pane, as gentle as breath on glass. "Roll call. Hale." And Thomas realized something terrifying, something he wished he could unhear. Whatever walked those fields already knew his name. Thomas spent most of the morning pretending everything was fine, the way people pretend a sinking boat is just taking on a little water. And he moved around the cabin with this slow, restless focus, checking the windows, checking the locks, checking the tree line like he expected someone to step out and wave at him. And Emily kept watching him with this soft worry on her face, the kind that makes a father feel both loved and incredibly guilty at the same time. But he still didn't tell her about the voice calling his name at dawn, or the boots that had circled the house like a phantom battalion waiting for orders, because he didn't want to scare her. Not yet. Not until he understood what he was dealing with. And honestly, he wasn't sure he'd ever understand it. The day passed in this weird, heavy quiet that felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath, and even the birds stayed strangely silent, as if they knew something had crawled back into the world that should have stayed buried. Thomas tried to distract himself with repairs, tightening hinges, fixing a loose floorboard, anything that felt normal. And at one point, he caught himself talking to the wall just to hear a human voice, muttering something like, "Yep, this is what retirement looks like, fixing dead people's houses." And then he laughed under his breath, because he knew he sounded ridiculous. But it was better than hearing the whispers that sometimes drifted through the cracks in the cabin, those low, echoing murmurs like tired soldiers talking in the distance. In the afternoon, Emily sat with him on the porch, sipping tea and pretending the cold breeze didn't send a shiver down her spine. And she finally said, "Dad, do you feel like we're being watched?" in this quiet, hesitant tone. And he almost lied, almost said no, but then he noticed the faint outline of footprints near the edge of the trees, heavy, deep, like someone had been standing there for hours. And he realized lying wouldn't help either of them. So he told her softly, "Just stay close to the cabin after dark." And she looked at him like she wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but she also knew there were some answers she wasn't ready to hear. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Thomas felt that familiar tension building again, the pressure that settled over the land every night, like the world was slipping into an older version of itself, one where the dead still remembered the living. Around midnight, he heard the first sign, the metallic clink of something dragging across stone, and his stomach tightened because he recognized that sound instantly. The scrape of a rifle butt hitting gravel, the kind of noise you hear when a platoon shifts formation. He moved quietly to the window, careful not to wake Emily, and watched the graveyard in the distance. The rows of crooked markers, barely visible under the pale moonlight. And at first he saw nothing, just the same still darkness, until one shadow moved, slow, deliberate, as if rising from the earth. His breath caught when he saw it, a figure stepping between the gravestones, tall and rigid, wearing what looked like the outline of an old military coat, its edges flickering like smoke. And then another appeared, tightened because he recognized that sound instantly. The scrape of a rifle butt hitting gravel, the kind of noise you hear when a platoon shifts formation. He moved quietly to the window, careful not to wake Emily, and watched the graveyard in the distance. The rows of crooked markers, barely visible under the pale moonlight, and another, forming a silent line stretching across the cemetery. Their movements were mechanical, synchronized, like they were performing a drill they'd done 1,000 tightened because he recognized that sound instantly. The scrape of a rifle butt hitting gravel, the kind of noise you hear when a platoon shifts formation. He moved quietly to the window, careful not to wake Emily, and watched the graveyard in the distance. The rows of crooked markers, barely visible under the pale moonlight. And at first he saw nothing, just the same still darkness, until one shadow moved, slow, deliberate, as if rising from the earth. His breath caught when he saw it, a figure stepping between the gravestones, tall and rigid, wearing what looked like the outline of an old military coat, its edges flickering like smoke. And then another appeared, and another, forming a silent line stretching across the cemetery. Their movements were mechanical, synchronized, like they were performing a drill they'd done 1,000 times before dying, and apparently 1,000 times after. Thomas felt a slight tremor in the floor, a low vibration rolling through the earth, and then the air shifted around him. But something in the cabin shifted then, something barely visible, just a flicker of movement behind him, and he turned sharply, expecting to see Emily. But the hallway was empty, just darkness stretching down like an open mouth. When he looked back toward the window, the soldiers were closer. Not much, just a few feet, but it was enough to make his blood run cold because they hadn't walked. He would have heard it. They had simply displaced, like reality forgot where they were for a second. He backed away slowly, grabbed the old lantern from the table, and stepped outside, even though a very reasonable part of him screamed at him not to, but he needed to know. Needed to understand how far they'd come, and the cold hit him instantly, a sharp, biting chill that wrapped around his lungs like icy fingers. The night was dead silent, so silent he could hear his heartbeat echo in his ears, and he whispered into the darkness, "Why me?" as if the wind would care enough to answer. After a long moment, something did answer, not in front of him, not behind him, but all around him at once. A whisper layered with 100 voices, some broken, some hollow, some barely holding on. "You heard us when no one else would." He didn't understand, didn't want to understand, but the soldiers in the distance took one synchronized step forward, the ground trembling beneath their weight, and Thomas felt it again, the pull, the summons, the expectation. He whispered, "I won't march," even though his legs felt strangely weak, as if someone else was testing the strings. He stumbled back into the cabin, slammed the door, locked it, then pushed a chair against it, even though he knew wooden chairs do very little against dead soldiers who don't respect doors. Hours passed like that. Thomas sitting awake, Emily sleeping down the hall, the whispers sliding across the windows like cold breath, and just when he began to believe that, he stumbled back into the cabin, slammed the door, locked it, then pushed a chair against it, even though he knew wooden chairs do very little against dead soldiers who don't respect doors. Hours passed like that. Thomas sitting awake, Emily sleeping down the hall, the whispers sliding across the windows like cold breath, and just when he began to believe that the night would pass quietly, something soft tapped against the front door. Not knocking, more like fingertips dragging across the wood. Then a voice, low and cracked, whispered, "Hale, fall in." Thomas closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against his hands, fighting the urge to answer like he had answered so many roll calls in his life. He waited until the tapping faded, until the whispers drifted back toward the graveyard, and only then did he finally breathe again. But right before dawn, as the first pair, because my legs didn't even ask for my opinion, they just kept moving like they already knew I wasn't escaping anything tonight. And as I stepped through the doorway, the air inside felt thicker, like it had been waiting, like someone had exhaled centuries of dust and forgotten sighs all at once. And I whispered this tiny, pointless hello that came out more like an apology, because who exactly was I expecting to respond in a place where even the walls looked like they were tired of holding memories? And as I moved deeper, the hallway seemed longer than before, stretching softly like warm taffy, Not in a dramatic horror movie way, but in a lazy, almost bored way, as if the house was saying, yeah, I might shift a little. What are you gonna do about it? And I kept thinking it was strange how quiet everything felt. Not an empty quiet, but a quiet that listens, a quiet that leans in, a quiet that wants to know what you're thinking. And the worst part was that I could sense something just a few steps behind me, not close enough to touch, just close enough to remind me it was real. And I didn't dare turn around because sometimes turning around is an invitation. So I just kept talking to myself gently, almost like a bedtime story, telling myself it was just old air, old floors, old shadows. But the truth was that the house didn't feel old at all. It felt awake, and when I reached what looked like a living room, if you could call a room full of crooked frames and a cold fireplace living, I noticed one picture that hadn't been dusty like the others. A quiet that leans in, a quiet that wants to know what you're thinking. And the worst part was that I could sense something just a few steps behind me, not close enough to touch, just close enough to remind me it was real. And I didn't dare turn around because sometimes turning around is an invitation. So I just kept talking to myself gently, almost like a bedtime story, telling myself it was just old air, old floors, old shadows. But the truth was that the house didn't feel old at all. It felt awake, and when I reached what looked like a living room, if you could call a room full of crooked frames and a cold fireplace living, I noticed one picture that hadn't been dusty like the others, almost like a bedtime story, telling myself it was just old air, old floors, old shadows. But the truth was that the house didn't feel old at all. It felt awake, and when I reached what looked like a living room, if you could call a room full of crooked frames and a cold fireplace living, I noticed one picture that hadn't been dusty like the others, as if someone had touched it recently, cleaned it even. And when I leaned in, I realized the figure inside the frame looked, and I swear I wish I was lying, it looked almost like me. Same posture, same half-tired expression, except the eyes were a shade darker, like they belonged to someone who hadn't slept in several lifetimes. And for reasons I didn't yet understand, it was almost relieved that I finally stepped inside. I stayed completely still for a moment, letting the air settle around me the way dust settles on a forgotten book, slow and intentional. And even though every sensible part of me suggested that leaving would be the healthier choice, there was this oddly gentle pull inside my chest, like the house wasn't threatening me so much as inviting me to finally understand something I'd been avoiding for a long time. And when I turned around, slowly, carefully, like I didn't want to startle whatever was sharing the room with me, I saw nothing dramatic, no figure, no shadow lunging, just a soft ripple in the dark corner. The kind that happens when someone moves quietly in their sleep. And for some reason that made it worse, because things that move like they're dreaming usually aren't alive the way we are. And I whispered this shaky little, "It's okay," even though I wasn't sure if I was reassuring the house or myself. And then almost like a memory brushing against me, I heard a voice, not loud, not sharp, just a tired whisper that said, "You came back." And that hit me in a strange way because it felt familiar the way a deja vu feels familiar, like something you remember without remembering why. And the house seemed to breathe with me, inhale when I inhaled, exhale when I exhaled, as if syncing with me slowly. And when I looked at the picture frame again, the me inside it seemed just a little more awake, a little more present. And I wasn't sure if that was comforting or horrifying, but in a strange, sleepy kind of way I felt accepted, like I'd opened the wrong door at the right time. And I stepped back toward the hallway because suddenly it felt like the whole place was guiding me gently, not pushing, not dragging, just nudging like a parent nudges a half-asleep child toward bed. And the walls seemed to relax. The air felt warmer, and somewhere behind me, that soft voice whispered, "You're home." And instead of panicking, and then almost like a memory brushing against me, I heard a voice, not loud, not sharp, just a tired whisper that said, "You came back." And that hit me in a strange way because it felt familiar the way a deja vu feels familiar, like something you remember without remembering why. And the house seemed to breathe with me, inhale when I inhaled, exhale when I exhaled, as if syncing with me slowly. And when I looked at the picture frame again, the me inside it seemed just a little more awake, a little more present. And I wasn't sure if that was comforting or horrifying, but in a strange, sleepy kind of way I felt accepted, like I'd opened the wrong door at the right time. Need to trap people. It just waited for the ones who belonged to it. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last. But in that low, sleepy moment, wrapped in a gentle kind of dread, I felt this strange peace in knowing that whatever I had been running from outside couldn't follow me here, because the house had closed around me softly, like hands cupping a candle flame, whispering that I never had to leave again. And the unsettling thing was, I didn't want to.